All right, let me talk a little bit more about how this gap sequence idea works. Let's suppose we want to create a sequence with a repetition period of 12 and with 5 triggers in it. Okay, so I'm going to represent this with a circle of circles. There's 12 small circles arranged around in one big circle. It's kind of like a clock face. And we're going to say this sequence is going to start at 1 o'clock. Okay, the offset parameter, you could change that to 3 o'clock or 8 o'clock or any other o'clock, but we're going to start at 1 o'clock. So we've got a trigger at the 1 o'clock position, and we now want to add 4 more, so we have a total of 5 triggers. And we're going to need to use a third parameter, which is called the generator, and we're going to use 5 for the value of the generator. So we've got a trigger at 1 o'clock, and with a generator of 5, it means we're going to have another trigger 5 positions later. So we're going to have another trigger at 6 o'clock. We just go in 5 steps clockwise from 1 to 6. Okay. Then we go another 5 steps from 6, which takes us to 11 o'clock, and that's where we put another trigger. Then we go another 5 steps clockwise from 11 o'clock. That puts us at 4 o'clock, so we've got a trigger there. And then finally, we go another 5 steps from 4 o'clock to end up at 9 o'clock. And that's where our 5th trigger is. Okay, so we've put 5 triggers down out of 12 by starting at 1 o'clock and then by going 5 steps at a time clockwise around and around until we get all 5 down there. And that's our gap sequence with a period of 12, number of triggers 5, and generator 5. Okay, we could use a different generator. So if we used a generator of 1, that would mean we'd start at 1 and then we'd go 1 step, so we'd have another trigger at 2, and we go 1 step, so we have another trigger at 3, and another at 4, and another at 5, and that's your sequence. It's just triggers on steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then nothing on steps 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. A generator of 2 would mean we'd start at 1 and then go 2 steps forward, so we'd have a trigger at 3, and another trigger at 5, another trigger at 7, another trigger at 9, but no trigger at 11. So that would be your sequence with a generator of 2. If you have a generator of 3, what happens? Well, you've got a trigger at 1 o'clock, a trigger at 4 o'clock, a trigger at 7 o'clock, a trigger at 10 o'clock, and then if you go 3 steps past 10 o'clock, you're back at 1 o'clock again. So you can only generate 4 triggers when you're using a generator of 3. That's because 12 is a multiple of 3, and 12 divided by 3 is 4, and that gives you the number of triggers that you can get. So if you want a 5 trigger sequence, you can't use a generator of 3. Likewise, if you have a generator of 4, that's only going to give you a maximum of 3 triggers, because 12 divided by 4 is 3. Generator 5, we already talked about. Generator 6, you only get 2 triggers. You get 1 o'clock and 7 o'clock, and then back at 1 o'clock again. So if you want 5 triggers with a period of 12, the generators you can use are 1, 2, and 5. You could try using numbers larger than 6 for a generator, but it turns out that 7 gives you essentially the same pattern as 5, except with an offset. And 8 gives you the same pattern as 4, and 9 gives you the same pattern as 3, and so forth. So the useful generators range from 1 up through half the repetition period. Okay, so using the gap sequencer, you get 3 different sequences for a repetition period of 12 and a number of triggers of 5. 12, unfortunately, has a lot of divisors. It's divisible by, 2 and 3 and 4 and 6. And so those generators don't give you enough triggers to give you a 5 trigger sequence. If you had a repetition period that was a prime number like 13, then you could use generators of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, and those would all work because none of those divide into 13. It's being prime. On the other hand, a 13-step sequence is a little unusual. Then again, we're using modular synthesizers here. We're supposed to be making unusual music. So go ahead, make music that repeats itself every 13 beats. Why not? But if you don't want to do that, if you really wanted more possibilities with, say, 12 beats, there is a cheat you can use. You could, instead of setting the period to 12, you set it to 13. And now with 13, you can use 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 for your generator. And then you can send in a reset pulse every 12 pulses. So it'll repeat itself every 12 beats because you're sending in a reset every 12 beats, but it's giving you the first 12 pulses of a 13-pulse sequence. So there are ways you can finagle yourself more possibilities if you really want that.